Hello, YouTubers. This is another session where Ricardo and I continue building API endpoints, backend core services, and front-end components for a decentralized social media platform targeting the de-productization of humanity. The more and more we hear in the news about the issues that happen in social media platforms, now called Meta and others, the more you understand that, the way how social media is architected and designed today is very poor. It's meant to be open source and it's meant to be decentralized so people can feel free to express their opinions, take responsibility for their expressions, and also maybe make a little bit of money on top of it from their communities. And as usual, I'm joined by my dear friend here, Ricardo. Hi, Ricardo.
Hello to
Welcome
you,
aboard.
sir. Yeah,
Yeah, and yeah, I think last time, let's jump right into it. You and I were doing the remove piece, so let's go right
yep,
back into it. I think last time we were doing a the piece around, being able to, remove validate post ID, and then if the post ID is invalid, it basically, throws an exception and says this is invalid. I'm just gonna run my tests here real quick just to ensure that we are at a good stopping point. I think this is where we are. And this time I'm gonna let you kind of do write a test. And the test I want you to do today, I'm gonna let you try it, take a look at it. We got the time, we got the effort, and we got the the energy to sit down together and make it happen. Here's the deal,
yeah,
my friend. Do you see this guy here? This guy says maybe post, right? Right?
hmm
If this guy comes back as null, we need to throw an exception that says not found. This post that you're trying to remove is not
mm,
found, right? So let's start from the test part. I will give you a failing test and I'll let you try to make it pass. What do you think about that?
sure. Let's do it.
Okay. Okay. So there is I'm gonna create here exceptions for a new file that's called exceptions.removeAll. So I'm gonna just copy this file here because I'm lazy, and then I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna say, here is exceptions, and then you have remove by ID like this. And in this remove by ID, we can just go up in here and basically write our test. So I'm gonna write my test from scratch. Like usually if you're working with me in a production environment, I go a little bit faster, but since we want to basically take it slow and see what's going on there, I'll take my sweet time. If that's okay with you. What do you think, huh? And then by the way, something very interesting. I was having a discussion with Eagle Hansen. He's a creator of B unit test unit test library, and he did something really awesome. He did something here called auto data, something like that. And I can't wait to explore this and see what is this all about. It doesn't seem to be, yeah, it pulls in auto fixture X unit 2. So this is something that's very uncharted waters for me. I'd love to see what he's doing there. Anyway, so let's just go ahead in here and say public async task should, right, should throw not found exception if, right, if post is not found, and log it async. Okay, so that's the test. The test basically says if the post, if the ID that you're passing back is not found, doesn't match anything, then let's throw an exception. How are we gonna do that? I'm gonna go up in here and say, well, there is I want to start with a GUID, right? And this is, random ID. I'm gonna
hmm
actually say some post ID. So some post ID meaning that the ID here doesn't really change anything of the outcome. Anything that if it changes, it doesn't change anything of the outcome. I don't say random and input. I say some post ID because I don't want you to even focus about it. It's just I'm putting it in there just because it's a requirement in the method. We can't actually test the method without passing an ID, but irregardless of what this is, it'll always return null.
Yep.
Whether there's because we're mocking this guy. So I'm just gonna go here and say, this is just some good ID, and then here's a post, and I'm gonna go and say no post, like null. It doesn't exist, right? It looks a lot better when you're, so that means if I go here and do my mock, so that's my storage broker mock. Let me zoom in here a little bit. If I go here and say, okay, this is my broker, and I go and say select post by ID, it is any post because I really don't care, right? So in here, whatever ID gets passed in, just return null, right? And this is a little bit of a new concept here because I'm basically going and saying, even though I'm going to pass in some post, I don't even care to verify. I just want this guy to return no post, whatever the passed in parameter may be. Okay, I see visible confusion. Tell me.
So why not the some post ID? That's kind of like the trick question there.
Because the responsibility of this test is how to react when the returned value from the storage is null. It doesn't care to verify whether what's passed in is what's being passed into the storage or not.
Okay.
Like if you look at the previous test, which is the happy path of this guy. So if you look at this guy here, it says should remove post by ID, right? Yeah, this guy literally says you have to pass in the right ID and the ID has to go in
Mm-hmm.
here because that's its job. Its job to say in a happy path scenario, right? If I pass in this input post ID, it has to match, right? But in this case here, we care less about what's being passed in
Yeah.
and we care more about how we react when the storage responds back with nothing.
Because of the essence of the type of test that we're doing, which is we're trying to
Yep, that's it.
mock a
Yep,
not found exception. So it
yep,
doesn't really matter what we do to, okay,
exactly.
yeah, I think I'm
All we
seeing it
need
now.
is just,
Yeah,
yep,
yeah,
all we need is to to take the shortest possible path to be able to go and say, hey, make a problem. Just make a
yeah.
problem and let's see how the test, reacts to it. Okay. So what does that mean? It means two things. Number one, we need to create not found post exception. So when the post is not found, we need to go and say not found post exception. So that localized inner exception is very specific, and apparently we don't have that yet, which is great because we get to go create it and talk about it. This is post dependency. Yeah, it's not here. Okay, perfect. So in the add, there is already exist post. It's bad if the post is already there. In the remove, it's bad if the post is not there. The opposite, right? So not found
Mhm.
post exception like this. And we're gonna go in here and say, okay, here's my exception. It inherits from exception. But I'm gonna go up in here and say, well, this guy only takes an ID, right? And this guy here will say, um, uh, uh, could not find post with ID. Just very simple
Yeah.
interpolation piece in here. Okay. And I heard yesterday I was reading something and I heard that you couldn't use constants in here in the past, but with C#10 you can
Oh yeah.
actually now pass in constant strings. That's pretty cool, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that's one, right? So this is not found post exception. It wants this some post ID in there. Okay, so now here's the deal. Now this became part of our test. Now it's important that the exception to have the right ID that was passed into the function, right? In this
Yeah.
instance, I'm going to go back here and say, no, now it's not some post ID. This is random post ID. And I'm going to go here and say GUID input post ID equal random post ID like this. And now that's important because now I really need to make sure that the exception carries the right message. See how I shifted real
Mm.
fast between I don't care, it's just something that I need to get in there. Okay, perfect. So okay, the second one, which is expected post validation exception, because this is a validation error, right? I'm basically
Mm.
going and saying, this is my post validation exception. Here's not found post exception right here. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the localized and this is the categorized, right?
Yep.
There's local exceptions and then categorized exceptions. Now, what's left for us? What's left for us is to make the event happen. So I'm not going to execute the function. I'm just going to go and say remove post by ID task because it didn't really call it yet. Calling in the service and then saying remove post by ID async input post ID. That's all great. And now I'm going to go here and say await assert throws async, right? That this post validation exception was thrown like this with remove post by ID task as task like this. Okay, so that's the first one. What else do you think we need to validate in here in our test?
Um, I believe we would need to then verify if the logging broker
Right.
logged the Yeah.
What other dependency was called before the logging broker?
Other dependency.
So we're gonna call the logging. That's a dependency, right? The logging broker. Did we call any other brokers that we need to verify they have been called in this
Well,
process?
well, for the storage broker, it was never called.
Yeah. No, it
Yeah.
was because this is how we knew, right? This
Oh,
is how we
right.
knew. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're right.
So
You're
let's
right.
do
It
that.
was called
Okay.
once. It was called once. Yeah.
Exactly. So I can go here and say broker.selectPost by ID. It is any good. I don't care. And then in here, I just want to make sure that this actually was a result of this guy being called at least once. Okay. Now comes in the last one. This is the one that you were talking about. I want to go here and say, yeah, broker.log error. It is, right? Same exception as. And then I'm gonna go here and say, yeah, this is the expected post validation exception times that once.
I have a question on that one.
Go for it.
So if it's true that we called it once for the select post by ID, it shouldn't be true for saying that the broker removed by ID was never called as well, or is that something redundant?
Yeah, we're gonna have to do
Or
that at the very end. At the very end here, we're gonna have to go the happy path. Absolutely. The happy path, which we should be there. This is 100% true. We need to go here
oh,
and
okay,
say, hey, remove post never happened, or
oh, okay,
delete post rather. Right?
oh, okay,
Delete post. It is, yeah. You're not wrong. You're absolutely right. This is my post here. Like this, and I'm gonna go here and say times never. Always the happy path needs to be validated when the sad passes. You say if it wasn't for all of this mess, we would have called this one,
yeah,
in that process. Now the last thing we do is we go and say verify no other
I know.
calls, verify no other calls. I don't know if we have a date time, bro. Yeah, we do. Verify no other calls. So this is making sure it's gauging any usage of your dependencies outside of what you already verified.
Got
So
it.
if someone
Yep.
goes in and calls the datetime broker inside your function, this will blow up. This will throw an exception. It will say, no, you can't do that because you never verified that the datetime broker was supposed to be called once. I'll show you. Like if you go up in here, like when you make this test pass, I'll show you. We'll try to sneak in a call to a datetime broker. This guy will blow up. He'll say you didn't verify that this dependency was supposed to be called. It's beautiful. Okay, look at what this guy's saying. He's saying, I expected you to throw a post validation exception, but I received nothing. Is that a good failing test? Do you think?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a good failing test because, it's supposed to throw an exception and it didn't, right? Okay. Do you know whose turn it is?
I believe it's me.
All right, go to town, my friend. Let's make it pass. Let's see how that works.
All
Okay, you're
right,
it. No pressure.
let me just think. Changes. While I do that, I'm going to be sharing the screen. All right.
Uh-huh. There's your screen. There we go.
All
All
right.
right. Okay,
Yeah, I'm
you're it.
already. Yeah, already got the changes, and I'm already running all the tests. So.
Nice. Let's make it rain.
Okay. Yep. All right. All right. Here you go. We got the failing
Uh-huh.
test. Let me just go to this guy. All right. Should throw my found post. So
Huh.
in this case, I would need to go to the delete post async because, sorry, control.
Delete is your broker. You have nothing to do with that, right? Because we're only focusing, this test is focusing on what? On the non-mocked things, which are what? Your business logic, right?
All right, right, yeah. So it'll be the remove post by, yeah.
That's right. That's right. That's your target. Yep.
So yeah, we already validated the structural.
Uh-huh.
Then that means we already got the post. That means we have to validate after the fact that we got a
Correct.
maybe post that could be a null. Okay.
Correct. Correct. Yes.
Okay, so
Let's try it.
just see what I'm trying to see if there's any methods here that we already
Nope.
have that.
Nope. I think you're gonna have to create one. So
What
what
about
I
this one? Oh wait,
this
this would be.
this throws null. We need a different one that takes in the post and the ID because we need the ID and the exception that we're gonna try to throw, which is not found post exception, right? Let's write a new method under this one that says, validate storage post. hmm
Okay. Storage post.
That's
I'm
right.
guessing you would get a good ID.
Yep. First we're passing in the post itself because we want to verify that the post is
Oh.
null or not, right?
Mm.
So call that maybe post. That inserted maybe post. We don't know. We don't know yet, right? And the other one is post ID. So the other parameter that you want to pass in is post ID.
Okay. So then we do the. Let me see if I can
hmm
invalid post ID.
So in this case, you're just validating just the one. So if you scroll down, you can just go and say if post is null, right? If post is null, all you gotta do is just go and say throw not found post exception. You won't have to use the business rules engine here because you're not collecting more than one validation issue at a time.
So this method in itself is more for the structural validation,
Yeah,
not
this
for
is more like
the logical one.
this is more like an external, you're calling an external source and you're pulling in data and you're running your logical validations on it. Some logical validations may fit into that report, that kind of structure, but in your case here, you're just looking for one particular exception that is not invalid, post exception. You're looking for an error that says not found. So you can go back on the controller and report 404 instead of
Mm.
400 or 409, right? So let's try that. Try it should be just a very simple if statement.
Like post. Oh, sorry. It's no.
Yeah,
And
I think it's called maybe post.
oh, maybe post it.
Yeah, yeah,
Then I would throw new not found
post exception.
post
And this guy
exception
needs a
and
parameter from you. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
post ID. Yeah.
Yep. So okay, that's the first step. There's another step that we need to take. So to make this happen, right? I mean, we need to call this function first, but there's also one more step. Give it a little bit of thought and I'll help you.
Okay, so
Hmm,
this would be the localized one. So I'm guessing
that's
we
right.
need to
There you
categorize
go. You
the
need to categorize. So
yeah,
you need to catch that exception and map it into a validation exception, right?
yeah.
Where do we
Okay.
catch that exception?
Well, the try catch method is already doing that in itself. So I'm guessing we need to
We just need to add
include
this new
another
type.
okay
Yep,
type. Oh,
yep.
okay.
Let's do it. So if you look at your solution explorer, it will show you where it is. There it is.
Yes.
Yep, you got the mark now.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wait, but then it would be
Exceptions.
exceptions. Yeah.
That's right. Okay, we need to handle a new thing.
So
Put it right under, put that right under the SQL exception.
the SQL
Mm.
exception. Right, because okay, yeah, because it has to do with
You have to connect to the database first in order for you to be able to. Mm.
yeah, orders and important. Yeah.
hmm
Yeah, right. So
hmm
not found exception,
Not found post exception.
not found post exception. That's right.
hmm
And then, so it would be,
So this is a validation exception, right? Because we're basically saying the ID that you passed in to me doesn't match any real post out there, right?
yeah.
So all you gotta do is just kind of pass that not found post exception inside a validation exception, like create and log validation exception, then that would be it.
So, oh, because it's already created.
It's
Then. Yeah.
already localized, right?
So it's like create
Unlog
unlock
validation.
validation exception, which is what not my post
That's
exception.
right.
All right.
Okay.
Neat.
Okay. That's perfect. Now, just make sure you called in validate storage post exception.
Which would be after the fact.
Perfect.
Create storage post.
Mm-hmm.
And pass the mini post. To the, oh, that's to
And
pass
the
the
ID.
and the ID. Oh, right.
Do ControlKD. It'll fix the spaces for you. There you go.
Nice.
Okay. Let's run it. Let's see.
So, oh, there we go.
Boom. Pass.
Awesome.
How about that?
That was amazing.
So here's the deal. So this, you can actually create a commit for this one with the name of the passing test, right? It's just very sweet
Mm.
and simple. Do you, okay, so throughout this process, do you have, is this very straightforward? You're basically going and saying there is something that's circuit breaking in your operation. And what I mean by circuit break, let's make the commit first. Copy the test name. I don't think it's that test. I think it's on the remove, Ricardo.
Yeah,
So
let
if
me
you go
just,
to
yeah, let me just put it in this remove.
exceptions, remove by ID, there it is. Yep, that's your guy. That guy is fast. Okay. So this is one part of it. You're basically going and saying, okay, this is the ID, it's being thrown, issues happen like this and all that. Here's what I have for you. I have one little favor of you to ask. For our session tomorrow, because this is really all I wanted to finish with you today. It's a very good, productive kind of piece. What's left is already handled. We need to handle two different kinds of exceptions. We need two tests to handle two different kinds of exceptions, right? We need a test that handles when a SQL exceptions happens when you try to remove. There's very
Mm.
similar examples in this code base that will show you how to do that. If I take your screen here for a second, if you give me a second here. So we want, I think three tests rather, three tests. I'll show you what it is. So number one, in this exception, because that's all that's left for us to wrap up this task, really. So bear with me. Number one, we need a test that is very, very similar, very similar to this test here that basically says should throw critical dependency exception, on add if SQL error occurred. Unlike the pattern of you and I writing a failing test and then making it pass,
Yeah.
in the case of this test, it will pass right away without it failing. Can you tell why? Because if you look at the remove post, the remove by ID post, it's already wrapped up in a func, in a delegate that's already handling all of the other things because we used it in the add, right?
Yeah, it already has the SQL
It
exception.
already has everything, right? Because
Yeah.
we already did it in the add, right?
Yeah.
So your test here will pass off the bat automatically. So that's number one test that we need to add. Number one, a test that will pass automatically for SQL exception. Are we clear on that one? That's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, we need to handle DB update concurrency exception. DB update concurrency exception. That one is gonna fail because we don't have that being handled yet anywhere. And DB update concurrency exception generates a localized exception that we say locked post exception. When you're trying to remove a record from the database, but the record is being used by another person or program.
Mm,
See how thorough we go? We go really deep into every
mm,
single possibility, right? So I'm trying to remove a post, and the post is good, it's there, but there's other process being writing to it or reading from it.
mm,
So it throws a DB update concurrency exception. The DB update concurrency basically saying two concurrent operations for update are coming in, and I couldn't process your request because the record or the resource is being used by a different person or program. That one I'll have you think about for a little bit. Write a failing test and then make it pass. It should be very similar in terms of pattern to handling a SQL exception with a little bit of detail. You're gonna have to do a little bit of research, okay? And then we'll
okay.
talk about it tomorrow as well. Like even if it doesn't come through with you, that's okay. We'll talk about it tomorrow. And then the last exception that we need to handle is just the service exception, and that one will pass off the bat. Why?
Yeah.
Because it's already being handled, in our tests, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me give you some resources. I'm not just going to leave you hanging, right? So, if you want to see some of these exceptions, how they're being handled, go to the OSSS repository. Go to OSSS repository here. I'm going to go into OSSS here. And if you go into the tests, let's go into foundations. Let's pick up something recent like fees or something. And let's try with remove. Do we have DB update concurrency? There it is. Do you see this test here?
Okay. Yeah.
So this test here is basically saying what? It's basically saying when a DB update concurrency exception happens, right? Go ahead and localize it as a locked fee exception. And then take that locked fee exception and wrap it up in a fee dependency exception. Is it critical? Is this exception critical? Should we log it as critical?
Mm,
It's not persistent. It doesn't happen all the
mm,
time, and it doesn't happen
no.
across multiple resources, which basically means that this exception is not critical because it doesn't happen all the time. It's not blocking everybody, basically.
Yeah, it's like a once in a life,
It's just like,
chance.
yeah,
Yeah.
really, really occasional, okay? And then you're gonna pick up the closest API or dependency call to attach that exception to it, even if it doesn't necessarily come out of that call. Usually a DB update concurrency exception will come out of a delete instead of a retrieve by ID. Why would you get a locked from there? But we really don't care. We just want to attach it to any dependency that we call first so we don't have to set things up
Mm.
unnecessarily. Let me ask you this. Is it okay to call it some fee ID in here or should we call it input fee ID?
I I think it would be input.
It would be input. Is it critical and important to know the ID in our case?
Well, if you're trying to delete something that is locked, shouldn't you know the ID for that?
Well, you're already passing it. You're already passing that ID in, right? But
Oh,
the but
yeah. Okay.
but more importantly, the message that's gonna come back is the whole message. Hey, this is locked. So there's
Yeah.
locked post exception. Okay. So there's that part, and then you're gonna read about the rest and see if you can spot. By the way, just because I'm pointing you to OSSS, our engineering standard is a living, breathing organism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's not just like we don't have anything called tradition. We don't have that. So it keeps changing all the time. Our engineering standard, it's not perfect and it's not complete and it never will be. It's not dogma. It's not, some holy book that doesn't never change. It changes all the time and the ideas around it changes all the time because technology changes all the time. And more importantly, I have second wins every other second. So it It doesn't really stay as is. So I will let you kind of think through the code. What's more important than write? There will be a point in time when you're writing the code, you wouldn't even think about the code anymore. You see how I'm talking to you while I'm writing code? I'm talking to you while I'm writing code. I'm actually doing three things. I'm thinking about the next step. What am I going to talk to you about? And I'm writing the code and I'm talking to you about what the code is doing, right? So it'll become
Hmm.
second nature for you. You wouldn't even think about the code. It's like driving, right? Do you drive or you drive your car? If you're
Yeah.
driving, how often do you think about driving? Do you think about driving today, like starting the car and taking the brakes and putting the signal and making sure your steering wheel is right on the road? You don't think about these things anymore if you've been driving for like 6 months or above. It's becoming second nature, right? This is the exact same thing here with software engineering and programming. Once these patterns are in your head, you're not really seeing code anymore. You're seeing particular blocks that you're putting them together to constitute a standardized industrial software. So there's that part. So this is one exception I want you to handle, in here, which is this guy. And then this one will require you to write in a failing test and a passing test. I don't expect you to do it, and don't try to copy paste it. Try to write it off your
Yeah.
mind, okay?
Yeah.
But unlike the failing schooling systems in so many places around the world, they tell you, oh, don't search, don't look up. No, I'm actually going to give you the exact answer, because the point here is not to have you kind of know the answer magically out of the blue. The idea here is for you to know the answer, and maybe someday you'll come back and add on top of it and make it even better and bigger. So okay, so that's this guy. And then the last one would be the service exception. That one will pass automatically. If you do these three things properly, the PR is done. And that would be your very first, I think, that would be your very first foundation service in a standard compliant. That's a free 10 points right there. Your average time is going to be a little bit high, right? You're going to be having averaging between 6 or 7, maybe 10 days average to finish a foundation service. But that's okay, because you're still getting started. You're learning, right? This is what Gatefile would tell you. Gatefile now has so many different other capabilities. I don't know if I talked to you about grade yet. Did I talk to you about grade yet? You probably have seen
Kind of.
it some.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned it, but no.
Yeah, now Gatefile has grades, and what these grades are is that how recent do you stay up to date? How do you when was your last actual contribution? So in addition to your actual years of experience that you already have, when was your truly last actual contribution to an open source? So basically, okay, I'm 39 days in, I'm level coder, and this year is 27%. Your pairing level is going to be much higher, because every code that you and I are pushing right now is pairing. You're pairing together with me. So that's great. But also, more important than all of this, there's a grade. And what the grade is, my friend, it's basically saying if you are really up to date and recent with technology, you're gonna get an A plus. If you miss a day, A1. If you miss 2 days, A2. And then if you miss 30 days, you go to B1. If you miss another 30 days, you go to C1. And if you want to come back in the game, you're gonna have to work your way up, right?
Mm.
You see here, I am S10. That's not a good thing at all. That basically means that I went offline for a while and really put code on the side. The reality of the situation is that my non-public repository were having much more of my attention than public repository, but we're working on Gatefile to actually make it a little bit bigger and better. Anyway, build your profile, build your career. Today I was talking to a good friend of mine about, taking out this code and have it generate a resume for you. So if you're
Mm.
working on brokers, it will write in there exceedingly efficient and building integration with databases, or exceedingly efficient and building integration with APIs, right? It depends on what your level are. It's a very long story, and this is a very long running project, and I can't wait to keep sharing things with people and making the world a better place, one line of code at a time. So anyway, at the end of the day, so you have an assignment, you have three things that you need to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to handle the SQL exception, you need to handle the DB update concurrency exception, and you need to handle the service exception. Remember, if it's gonna fail, then one commit for failing test, and then another completely different commit for passing test, right? If it's passing, then just passing. You just write a test and make it pass, and then move on to the next thing. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so very much, Ricardo, for your time and effort. I appreciate your zeal. I appreciate your ability to show up there and help other people. A lot of people like you and I want to learn about building proper software and build proper APIs, and I hope this would be useful for them. And for you watching us right now, thank you so much for watching. And as usual, if you have comments, concerns, compliments, don't forget to drop a comment in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in another video.
Take care.